This is a New Jersey Network special report. Governor Kean's State of the State Address. From
Hello, I'm Kent Manahan. During the next half hour, Governor Tom Kean will take the podium to deliver his final State of the State address. It will be the last time the governor stands before a joint session of the legislature, and we can expect a different tone to this year's message. We won't be looking for Kean, whose term expires next Tuesday, to outline new programs. We can expect perhaps a more visionary speech, a hopeful look ahead, and a nostalgic glance to the past. Joining me in our Trenton bureau today, senior correspondent Michael Aaron. Michael, after 8 years, I think we probably can expect some nostalgia from Tom Kean.
I'm sure that Tom Kean views this as the crowning moment of his 2 terms as governor, a chance to shape the legacy one more time, to write the record books one more time, and put one last spin on 8 years worth of Tom Kean as governor.
We are, of course, awaiting word that the governor will begin his final State of the State message in Trenton this afternoon. And while we await, you and I will have some discussion about what we have seen, an advance copy of the governor's speech. And we have seen that there are touches of nostalgia, praise for his last 8 years, but a very different tone than what we saw in previous speeches, and especially back to 1983 when he gave his first State of the State address.
As you said a moment ago, this is not a State of the State address about programs. It's really more about feelings. And 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I guess it is. No, it's 7 years ago.
That's
when
right.
Kean delivered his first State of the State in January of '83. There were dark times in New Jersey. He spoke about the whirlpool of recession. It was the only time in my memory that, other than Jimmy Carter talking about the malaise that gripped America back in the late 70s, that a politician has given a State of the State address and not said the State of the State is good. Every year since then, Kean has said the State of the State was very good, given himself a certain amount of credit, perhaps rightly so. This year, in this speech, he doesn't say the State of the State is good in those exact words. He says it in a much more oblique and broad fashion, as we'll see soon.
You and I stayed up late last night looking through some of the old State of the State addresses, and I noticed a very different tone from 1983 to 1984, when it was pretty much gloom and doom in '83, as you've said, to '84, where the governor was patting his administration on the back for bringing us out of that gloom and doom and looking forward to a much brighter future.
Well, he spoke in the '83 address about the recession of 1982 and called it the worst economic times since the Great Depression. And I don't know that anybody can argue with that, although it certainly didn't feel like we were living through anything like a depression back in 1982. Then in the speech of '84, the economy had turned around by that point in time. They had accomplished a few things in 1983. They had passed the Right to Know law. They had begun civil service reform, which was something very important to Kean back then. What struck me as I was looking at some of those old speeches was that in '85, his third State of the State speech and the beginning of an election year, not only was the State of the State good, he said, but his first words were, "These are great times to be a New Jerseyan." Thinking of the election, I guess. And that was also the longest State of the State address. The printed copies that we have come out to about 14, 15 pages each year. In the election year of '85, the speech went 26 printed pages. That struck me.
And we're still awaiting word that the governor will begin his State of the State for the year 1990, his final State of the State, actually looking back over the past 8 years in New Jersey. And while we wait, State House observers have been speculating about just what Governor Kean will have to say in his last address. That was evident yesterday at a news conference in Tom Kean's office when reporters pressed him for any little insight into his final address.
I've done one draft. I've done one draft, and it's going to be, frankly, it's going to be, as you would imagine, sort of a farewell address to the state, and it's going to be quite reflective. and I'm going to be saying a few things that perhaps I might not have said were it not my last address.
Like what?
Well, that you'll have to wait and see. Some of them in reflection may come out. I don't know.
What are your personal feelings as you're writing this, knowing it is your last State of the State?
Well, I'm almost going to write. I'm almost writing some of those feelings right into the message, and they're mixed. Obviously. On the one hand, I'm looking forward with tremendous anticipation to the whole experience I'm going to have at Drew. I mean, I'm very excited about getting in touch with young people again to get some of that enthusiasm and energy and finding out what they're all about. On the other hand, seeing some of the team in a sense that we've built up, seeing some very good people around here all going in different directions is sad. So it's sort of a bittersweet kind of a thing. I'll miss people. So that's what I'll miss most about this job. But I'm looking forward ahead.
Are you going to offer any, let me put it this way, what advice are you going to offer Governor-elect Florio tomorrow? Certainly you will.
Well, if I told you that, I wouldn't be any point in my saying anything tomorrow.
Without giving away the speech, could you give us an idea of some of the themes that you might hit on, either in that advice or in general?
Well, I think it would be a mistake to talk too much about it because, it's a speech I'll be giving tomorrow, first of all, and secondly, a speech that isn't finished yet. So one is I probably shouldn't give you anything, and secondly, if I did, I might mislead you because I might give you something that will come out in a final draft. So there's some things that I've got to think about again before they go.
What makes it so difficult to get this completed? Would you rank this up there with your keynote address to the convention and difficulty?
It's very difficult to write the speech at the end of an administration, and also, as many of you who've covered me for years know, I'm not terribly good at getting speeches written well in advance. I don't know whether it's back from my days in graduate school or something, but I tend to write better under pressure, and the closer the deadline gets, I find the better I can write. So often that kind of pressure concentrates my mind, and I'm sure I'll get it in good shape by this evening.
Well, do you be talking at all about the budget deficit?
Well, I'll see what I'll be talking about. I mean, I'm still working on it.
But do you consider the speech primarily a farewell address, or might you all have recommendations for programs, that kind of thing?
Well, it doesn't mean you can't make recommendations in a farewell address. After all, George Washington did. Not to compare myself, but I mean.
And while we await Tom Kean's final State of the State address, I'm rejoined by Michael Aaron here in our Trenton Bureau. And Michael, we have seen an advance copy of today's speech by the governor, and I thought it was very interesting to note that so much was noted on the copy of the speech itself, including the gestures and when it's proper to gesture as the governor delivers his line.
I don't know that we were supposed to see that copy of the speech, but somehow we got a copy of the speech that has a few stage directions on it, and it was hard to know as you were reading the stage directions whether Kean wrote those himself for himself or whether some staffer wrote the stage directions in. Yeah, it's always interesting to read somebody's stage directions.
And one of the comments that the governor just made in that press conference yesterday with the reporters was that this was kind of a last-minute speech as far as his participation in it, and he's always better writing at the last minute. But interestingly, as I read through today's speech in our advance copy, I saw a notation that the new governor would be sworn in a couple of weeks, and in fact we're down to the final days of when the new governor will be sworn in. So maybe there was a good bit of preparation ahead of time on this speech.
There was a newspaper article last weekend that painted the image of Governor Kean writing this speech himself, seated at some desk up in Livingston, really writing this one himself for the first time. I'm told that there's a lot of Tom Kean in this speech, more than in previous State of the States, but that it did follow the same pattern. A speech writing staff starting with a draft, presenting it to the governor, and then it went back and forth from there.
Well, I think we have both agreed that it is a real Tom Kean speech. Whoever did the work ahead of time, laying the foundation of the groundwork, certainly the governor did put his style into it.
He did, and as reading it, I found the end of it very moving, and I'll be interested to see whether the governor is moved delivering those words at the end and whether the audience is moved hearing them. Maybe they just read well. We'll see.
I guess we'll find out soon. In the meantime, State House correspondent Larry Stoopnagle is standing by at the War Memorial Building in Trenton, where the governor will make his address shortly. Larry, these addresses are traditionally late, frequently because the assembly is in session right up until the time that the address is about to be made. Any feeling on the time frame for today's speech?
Well, Kent, the situation here at the War Memorial is right now is that the Assembly, as you know, the new Assembly was sworn in a short time ago. They wrapped up at about 20 minutes to 2. Of course, it takes time to tear down the old stage, prepare the stage for the governor's State of the State message. We also haven't seen the Senate downstairs yet, so we're waiting for their arrival since the State of the State message is a joint message before a special session of both houses of the legislature. We're still awaiting the Senate. It could be around 2:30, quarter to 3 possibly, before we have the arrival of Governor Kean here to deliver his last message. In the meantime, joining me now to talk about Governor Kean's tenure is a man who has known the governor for 20-some-odd years. Governor Kean appointed Bob Franks to be the state GOP chairman. Bob Franks is currently an assemblyman here. Bob, you've known the governor for a long time. You've had a chance to glance at his speech. We don't want to steal his thunder, but what do you think of it as a farewell address, if you will?
I think it's superb, and I think more appropriate than any other speech that he might offer up today. He recognizes very clearly that he is leaving office imminently, and I think it's a very personal reflection on what the experience of being governor has been all about, yet pointing to some of the significant areas of progress, and yes, some of those challenges that still remain to face the state.
What do you think was Governor Kean's biggest contribution to New Jersey in his 8 years as governor?
I think in a tangible sense, Larry, it was undoubtedly the economic prosperity that he helped to generate and preside over. The most common signs now along any highway or main street in New Jersey are help wanted signs. We have a low unemployment rate. It just dropped last month to 3.5%. We have a record number of New Jerseyans working. Small businesses are doing well. We have an economic prosperity over the past 8 years in this state that I think is unparalleled in the state's long history. And I think that's undoubtedly going to be the hallmark of this administration, but in a less tangible, but I think equally important way, his installation of pride in the people of the state of New Jersey has been just a remarkable transformation for the 7.5 million of us who call New Jersey home. We used to be the butt of every joke. We used to kind of be embarrassed when our neighbors from other states asked us where we were from. That's no longer the case. We're a national model in so many different areas, and the resurgence of pride that has really been I think, again, a hallmark of Tom Kean's administration and of the man personally. You're proud to call him a governor. You're proud to know that he represents us across this country. We're proud very, very often of the national media attention that he gets. And I think that sense of pride that he's engendered in all of us is something that will be a lasting legacy from Tom Kean.
Critics of the governor have said that he has instilled pride in the state. He did preside over a time of economic growth, but not everybody was able to participate in that growth. The cities are still, by and large, in bad shape. The urban schools have not risen along with some of the suburban schools. What's your response to that?
Well, those problems are as old as government's efforts to try to solve them. We'll always try to educate our children better. We'll always try to improve the quality of our environment. We'll always try to put more people to work. But let me ask, I don't think that any governor can point to a record on education in the way that Tom Kean can. His educational reforms, which he's brought to New Jersey, are now the model for the federal government. 20-odd states have followed the alternative certification program. We are a national leader. Do we have longer to go? No question. We're not through. But Tom Kean has accurately pointed us in the right direction and has told us to get our attention and our resources directed in the right places.
What do you think is Tom Kean's future in the party now after he leaves office? 1 week from today, there'll be a new man at the head of the state. Tom Kean is going off to Drew University. What role will he play in the Republican Party, both in New Jersey and in the state?
I think it's really up to him. If I know Tom Kean, he's not going to quibble with the minutia of the Republican Party's apparatus nor its policies. But I do know that when an issue of tremendous importance is before us, and the party needs to stake out its ground relative to that position, to make sure that all people feel welcomed within the hallways of the Republican Party's activities, then I know Tom Kean's going to speak up. And I hope that it's more frequently than not, because we do need that continuing sense of guidance and leadership which he's been so effective at generating during the course of the past 8 years. We need him now.
How much rebuilding does the party have to do after the last election now?
this party is enormously strong. We lost the gubernatorial contest by 500,000 votes, but we only lost a couple of seats in the General Assembly. We have every opportunity and every intention of recapturing the General Assembly majority control in 1991 and finally breaking the Democrat stranglehold over the state Senate. We're knocking on the door over there, and I think 1991 is our year. We had some great freeholder victories in counties like Burlington, very near to Jim Florio's base in Camden. We swept the freeholder board in counties like Monmouth. We had a good year, generally speaking. The party is resilient. We're going to be back, and we're going to be able to take majority control again.
All right, Assemblyman Robert Franks, thank you for joining us here as we await the arrival of Governor Tom Kean to deliver his final State of the State message. We'll be going back to the studio, and in just a moment we'll be joined here by Senate President John Russo to get a Democratic perspective on Tom Kean's 8 years in office. Now let's go back to the studio to Michael Aaron and Kent Manahan.
All right, Larry, thank you, and we will rejoin you shortly. But in the meantime, we're going to take a break in our coverage of Tom Kean's final State of the State address to a joint session of the legislature. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to New Jersey Network's live coverage of Governor Thomas Kean's final State of the State address. We hope that will begin shortly, but in the meantime, I'm joined here in our Trenton Bureau with our senior political correspondent, Michael Aaron, and we've been talking about what we can expect to hear today in the governor's message. And Michael, in your opinion, can we expect this final State of the State to be a true reflection of the state of our times in New Jersey?
Well, I don't know that a State of the State address is ever a true reflection of the state of the state. It's an embellished and slightly rosy look at the state of the state. Be that as it may, I think one question we all have going into this speech is, will Governor Kean allude to Governor-elect Florio, have anything to say to or about Governor-elect Florio, and will he allude to the budget problems that are going to face Governor-elect Florio? Maybe someone will feel that this is not the appropriate setting in which to talk taxes and budget cuts. From our advanced copy of the speech, we can see that there is a reference to Governor Florio and some words for the governor. No real acknowledgement of the budget problems that face Florio ahead.
And interestingly, you and I had both heard that perhaps this address would include some reference to the fact that taxes will have to be raised in New Jersey in order to meet that budget deficit, which we've been talking about. But we did not see it in our copy, at least. Of course, that's not necessarily the final copy, because this speech is often amended right up until airtime.
Yeah, there is a mysterious process that goes on where last-minute changes are made. We could hear some reference added at the last moment.
This is really a time of withdrawal, I would think, for Tom Kean, in that being governor for 8 years, of course, the highest office in the state, where you're chauffeured around, taken to all kinds of ceremonies and receptions and so forth, and in a sense, I guess, treated like royalty. And then you go back to being, as we've heard, Citizen Kean. There has to be a period of withdrawal for the governor after 8 years.
I like your allusion to royalty. I sometimes like to think of New Jersey as a small European country, or the equivalent of a small European country. You know, we have 7.5 million people. I think there are 4 million people in Belgium and 14 million in Holland. So we're about the size of a small European country, and we have everything a country has here. And Tom Kean has been our king. And yes, I'm sure he's going through, or will go through, a kind of withdrawal. And yet it's interesting to note in this speech that he doesn't sound sad.
No, he doesn't, yes. And again, we don't want to give too much away on this speech. We've talked enough about it, but we haven't given you all of the points. And as we said, we have seen an advance copy, but we will wait to have the final version for you to see shortly as we await Tom Kean's final State of the State address. But tonight at 10 o'clock, New Jersey Network is going to air a Target New Jersey special report, a conversation with Governor Kean. It's a look back at the governor's 8 years in the State House. We think you're going to enjoy it, and here's a little preview.
Oh, I don't think of Drew as a holding place. I think as Drew was an exciting challenge and a good place to be. Question is, will I ever want to run for office again? I doubt it. Would I ever want to go back into the public sector at some point? Maybe, depending on the opportunity and the job. But that's That's down the road.
President Bush says you're a treasure. He can't let you go. You've got to move on to the national scene at some point, he says, but he won't tell me where or when. Governor, you've been heard to say that Bill Bradley cannot be beaten. But we wonder if you say that because you really would not want to run against Bill Bradley, and you're hoping that no one will ask you to do that.
Well, I wouldn't run against Bill Bradley anyway, because Bill Bradley and I happen to be friends. While we may disagree on some subjects, we agree with and on a number of others, and I think we have basically the same approach to government. Bill Bradley and I have worked extraordinarily well together, with me as governor and him as United States Senator. So it would be, from that point of view, you know, it's almost impossible, I think, at least would be for me anyway, to run against a friend. And to run against a friend who you also respected a great deal, you know, regardless of his enormous popularity and all of that, it just wouldn't be in the cards.
Now, I've heard that you were once mistaken for Bill Bradley.
It's funny, you know, you get a little, sometimes just when you think everybody knows what you're doing in these jobs, something brings you back to earth, and it's great that it does. We just stopped for one of these little sort of coffee places down in southern New Jersey, and I walked in, and the waitress looked at me and she said, "Look who's here, look who's here," and she ran into the kitchen and got her husband, who was doing the cooking, and a couple of other people back there, and got them all out front, and then he went back and said, "I want to get the camera," and he said, "Will you pose with the family?" I said, "Sure," and all of that, and then she said, "You know, it's so wonderful, Senator Bradley, to have you here."
Were you complimented?
I was complimented.
At least for the moment.
But it brings you back to earth, and you recognize a little bit that, hey, not that many people know what you've done, let alone who you are.
Do you need to come back to earth every once in a while after being in the governorship, do you think? The recognition, the power, the awe of the office?
I think it's very important. And one of the reasons, frankly, I'm happy about Drew is it gives me a chance to get back to earth. It gives me a chance to think and to write and to talk to young people and get sort of reinvigorated by their idealism. You do need to be brought back to earth. It can be a very artificial job. I mean, you get picked up in the morning, a state policeman drives you. If you go to the airport, they put you in a plane, you've got a helicopter at your disposal. Presumably, if you say do, somebody does. If you come into a room, everybody stands up. It's an artificial kind of a life in many ways, and it's you do need things every now and then just to bring you back. My wife's wonderful that way. She brings me down to earth every day. You know, take out the garbage. You know? Yep, take out the garbage and all of that. I asked her to, you know, you don't think sometimes. I asked her to get me a number the other day. She said, "I'm not your secretary," and I said, "All
right." You were brought back down to earth.
That's right.
Have you enjoyed the last 8 years?
I've loved it. I've loved every minute of it. It's a wonderful job. I mean, the variety is total. The excitement is there. Being able to represent the people of the state you live in is the kind of honor that very few people are given. The whole thing. It's been an exciting, wonderful experience, and the kind of thing I'll obviously talk about and think about and remember the rest of my life.
That's an excerpt from New Jersey Network's special report, A Conversation with Governor Kean. You can watch it in its entirety tonight at 10 o'clock on New Jersey Network channels. We're going to go back to the War Memorial Building now, where Governor Kean will be making his speech. The governor isn't there yet, but Larry Stupnagel is. He's standing by with another guest. Larry?
Thank you very much, Kent. The last word we heard is that the governor will be leaving his office in the State House to deliver his final State of the State message at approximately 2:30. That should put him here around 2:35, so hopefully between 2:35, 2:45, we should be getting the governor's farewell address to the troops, so to speak. Joining me now is a man who served as Senate President during Governor Kean's last 4 years in office, and that is former Senate President John Russo. Senator Russo, as you look back, you worked with the governor. Most of the time, actually, you had a better relationship with him than some Republicans. But what do you remember most of when you look back at Governor Kean, when you look at his tenure? How is history going to remember him? How do you think it's going to remember him?
Well, I think probably the thing they'll remember most about Tom Kean is the image he projected for New Jersey. He did project a very favorable, a very positive image. He was helped along by a favorable economy. He was a little lucky in that respect, but on the other hand, he fit his programs and his style right into that. And I think people had a better feeling about New Jersey because of Tom Kean. I think people outside the state, as I talked to them, had that same reaction. So I think Tom Kean will be remembered for the image that he projected, probably more than any other specific item, although he had some fine programs too.
Where do you think his administration fell short?
Well, if I had to, I give it high marks generally, and if I had, though, to criticize it, I would say maybe it didn't take advantage of the very high popularity of this governor and do some of the tough things. There did seem to be a tendency towards sometimes the easy way out, the popular way, and that's something that I talked to Tom Kean about privately as well as publicly. I think he could have done better in that regard, but that isn't to be interpreted as a negative overall mark toward his administration. Though he's a Republican and we're Democrats, I think overall he did a fine job. He left office with a good record, a positive image. Someone can always do a little better, and it's easy to criticize one or two things, but overall, Tom Kean's been a good governor. I found him in time to become a very good friend, although it didn't start out that way.
Senator Russo, this is Kent Manahan speaking to you from our Trenton Bureau. A question, if I could. I interviewed you recently for a documentary we were doing about the last 8 years of Tom Kean's governorship here in New Jersey, and you made a remark to me that it was interesting to you that there were times when he seemed to get along with the Democrats better than he did with his own Republicans.
Well, I think that was true, with certain Democrats anyway. I can only speak for myself. I developed a slow, gradual appreciation of Tom Kean and came to realize that though he was a tough partisan, and he's a dedicated Republican, he was also a loyal friend. And if you needed a helping hand, he gave it to you. And I think as he came to know I would do the same for him, we developed a friendship. So this is one Democrat he got along quite well with toward the end, and he's one Republican that I did. I'm sure that's also true of many Democrats. I don't think, though, it should be interpreted to be that he wasn't a good Republican. I think he was the best thing the Republican Party had going for it the past 8 years, and as a Democrat, I can only say thank God he's out of the picture now. It'll make things a lot easier for us, and of course, we looked at Jim Florio to build a wonderful record too, comparable, maybe even better than Tom Kean, but we're prejudiced, we're Democrats, but he did get along well with Democrats, but I think that's a tribute to the type of man Tom Kean is. He's a fine human being.
Is he a tough act to follow for Florio?
He's a tough act to follow, but Jim Florio's a different type of guy. Jim will be more active, more hands-on than Tom Kean was. Jim is a hard driving worker, and I wish he played tennis as Tom Kean did. I'd get to know Jim better, and as I've gotten to know him lately, I've come to like him a lot more, and sometimes those other things help. But yes, he's a tough act to follow, but Jim Florio's got the ability to attain that following and succeed that tough act and maybe even improve upon it. I hope so as a Democrat, but it is going to be hard because Tom Kean has a fine legacy he's leaving behind him.
What about your personal plans for the future now? You are no longer Senate President. You will be going back to the Senate. We've heard reports that there may be a judgeship for you. What are your personal plans? What does John Russo want to do in the next few years?
Well, I can only tell you I'm not looking to be a judge. I respect the judiciary tremendously, but I'm too active for that. I've got to be moving and doing a lot of things and climbing mountains wherever they may be, whether they're in the legislature or not. I'm not yet sure. I just wanted to get the succession of the Senate over with, and my fine friend John Lynch has taken over for me, and he's going to do a great job as Senate President. I'm going to enjoy helping him and working with him. As for where I'm going, I don't know. I like to ski, I like to play tennis, and I like to work hard. So I'm going to look around for the next mountain and see where it is and try to do the best that I can at whatever I do, as I have tried to do in the 17 years so far I've been in government. But I have no definite plans, but no, I'm not seeking an appointment to the bench, though I respect the judiciary, as I said, nor frankly have I asked for anything other than to continue right now in the Senate, as long as I'm there to represent the people of Ocean County and help John Lynch be a great Senate President.
Senator John Russo, thank you for joining us here today. Good luck to you in the future. As we said a little earlier, we expect Governor Kean to be joining us to leave his office approximately 2:30, put him here about 2:35, so hopefully by 2:45 we should have Governor Kean's State of the State message, and we'll be back here in a few moments, hopefully with the Governor's press secretary, Carl Golden. Now let's go back to the studio with Kent Manahan and Michael Aaron.
All right, Larry, we will be rejoining you shortly, and thank you. In the meantime, we're going to take a break in our live coverage of Governor Thomas Kean's final State of the State address. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. I'm Kent Manahan. As we've been saying, this is the 8th and final State of the State address that Governor Thomas Kean will deliver. We thought we'd go back in time for his first address. The date was January 11th, the year 1983. Here's how Tom Kean began his message after 1 year in office.
In ordinary times, this message has been used to offer major new programs, ranging from the creation of new cabinet positions to massive spending programs. These, however, are not ordinary times. New Jersey, as well as the rest of the nation, are caught in the whirlpool of a worldwide recession. We as a state must do everything we can to escape that whirlpool. We must start by recognizing that we can no longer afford to submit to demands and succumb to outside pressures which have led to the unbridled and costly government of prior years. In the past, in those ordinary times that I just spoke of, government continually sought to expand, to find new areas for involvement. It moved into more and more aspects of our daily life, developing and enacting new programs to serve every possible constituency. Our economic prosperity, our rising growth rate, made it simple indeed to finance these legislative and executive forays into new and politically popular areas. When expenses couldn't be met, they were simply postponed, left to later generations of taxpayers to support, because we were confident that a rising growth rate would give us the funds to meet any conceivable need in the future. Now, however, that time is over. The day of reckoning is here. The engine of prosperity which pulled government along seems to have halted in its tracks. That constant effort to seek votes with new or expanded programs must now come to a halt also. It's time for a reappraisal, a breathing spell, if you will, a time to pause and examine with a critical eye the role of state government. We must look again at those programs and policies of the last 20 years, as to giving an eye as to whether or not they're truly essential, and whether or not, in time of recession, that our people can afford them. The wave of prosperity which produced all these new programs also has created a bureaucracy which I sometimes find almost unmanageable. Rather than being able to respond quickly and effectively to serve the people, government, it seems, has become fatter and become slower. Believe me, the frustrations felt by taxpayers in their attempts to deal with this bureaucracy are felt by the governor's office as well. I recall the words of the late President John Kennedy, who in angry frustration at attempting to move the Washington bureaucracy once said it was like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall.
Time, here we go.
That was an excerpt from the governor's very first State of the State address in 1983. And we are going to rejoin Larry Stupnagel, who is standing by at the War Memorial Building in Trenton, awaiting the governor's final State of the State address. Larry?
All right, we've just seen the new Senate President, John Lynch, arrive on the stage here. That means the governor's appearance here at the War Memorial is probably getting close. Before the governor arrives, though, we want to get a few reflections from a man who's been with the governor for his entire tenure as governor, and that's his press secretary, Carl Golden. Carl, you've been with him for the whole time. What's he been like to work for, and what are your feelings today?
Well, I'm going to miss working for him, obviously. It's hard to work for a man for as long as I've been with the governor. I joined him in 1971 when he was still in the legislature. And I've never had a bad day working for him. I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss, not so much miss state government, but miss the people in it. I mean, you spend 8 years of your life in the governor's office. It's a substantial chunk of your life to just sort of walk away from. But, hey, it's over. That's what democracy's all about. It's somebody else's turn now.
Everybody who's been close to the governor, press reports say he's an awfully nice guy. What's it like, what's been the toughest moment for that awfully nice guy in the 8 years as you go back and look at it?
Toughest moment, I think, was probably what came later to be referred to as the DMV problem, because what occurred went totally against the grain of everything he had tried to do, which was open government, accessible government. And here we got ourselves in some trouble because someone decided that open, accessible government wasn't going to work. And he really had a hard time dealing with that. But what you see in Tom Kean in public is exactly what you get in Tom Kean in private. He's exactly the same kind of man.
What's in the future for him? State politics, national politics?
Well, he has made it clear that he doesn't expect to run for political office again. But I certainly expect to see him stay active in some appointed capacity, and he'll certainly speak out when he thinks he has to, when he thinks the situation requires it. You'll be hearing from Tom Kean.
Do you think the Bush administration may reach down here in a year or two?
I wouldn't be surprised.
All right, Carl Golden, thank you for being with us today. And I think the arrival of the governor is imminent here. We do have the special session, the joint session, both the Senate and the Assembly are in. So the governor should be preparing to give his final State of the State message in just a moment. Let's go back to the studio to Michael Aaron and Kent Manahan.
All right, Larry, and we probably will be interrupted at almost any time, Michael, to rejoin Larry at the War Memorial Building for that address. But in the meantime, I thought it was interesting what Carl Golden had to say. Certainly, he's feeling sentimental today.
He is. That's a soft Carl Golden. Those of us who know how gruff he can be probably appreciated seeing him soft, cuddly, kinder, gentler Carl Golden. It was also interesting to hear him say that the DMV scandal was probably Tom Kean's toughest moment. I don't know that I would have picked that out among all the problems.
What would you have picked?
Well, there were some tough times. There was dioxin in the streets of Newark. That's
the story that came to my mind right now.
And what do you do about it?
Yes.
And it was a young and untested Governor Kean who went up there and did the right thing, as it turned out, which was reach out to the neighbors. He's going to allude to that in today's address.
The governor certainly played that problem out very well as far as the people and the media were concerned in terms of, as you said, going to the site, going door to door to the people, warning them that, or telling them rather, that there was no need to be concerned, and also dressing up in the suit, the white suit, I forget what you call it at the moment. But
the toxic waste protection suit,
right.
The space suit is what it looked like, and we all credited his PR manager, Greg Stevens, with a masterstroke there, but that may have been just the cynical side of us. There was a reason to be up there. It may have been a turning point for Kean.
Well, certainly a way to get his name out early on in his administration among the people as doing something for the people of New Jersey.
Another tough time for him was the same year as the DMV problem, the governor's ball problem, when it was learned that Kean cabinet officers were their tickets to the governor's ball were being paid for by people whom they regulated, and they were sitting with people whom they regulated. That was an unsavory appearance to that, so that I could have imagined Carl Golden mentioning that. We heard Tom Kean from 7 years ago, a few minutes ago, and I thought that was interesting too, and that there was an irony there, couple ironies there. First of all, it was a younger looking Tom Kean by 7 years, and we all have aged. We've all seen old video of ourselves
Perhaps
recently.
you have, Michael.
And yeah, that's right, you are ageless, I'm told. And We saw Alan Karcher. We saw the old Assembly chamber. We saw.
All right, Michael, I think we're going to be interrupted to go back to Larry Stupnagel at the War Memorial Building for the governor's final State of the State address. Larry?
That's right. That's right, Kent. We are waiting now. They've just been informed here that the governor has arrived. You can hear the applause. They're looking to the back of the room, so the governor is walking in now to give his final State of the State message. He is being escorted by a delegation of both Republicans and Democrats as he prepares to give his final State of the State message here. The speech will be about, well, it's a 24-page speech. We're told it will run about 30 minutes or so. It'll be a fond farewell, and it's also looking forward a bit, as you and Michael have also talked about. The governor is being warmly received here by the members of the Senate and the Assembly. Also numerous friends of the governor. The governor's family is also here with him today. He will allude to them in this final message. Of course, up on stage right now, you have the new leadership in the State House, both Democrats. Of course, you have the new Senate President, John Lynch, and the new Assembly Speaker, Joseph Doria. They were both, Doria was sworn into office again, and he was sworn into his new job just prior to the governor's State of the State message now. The governor is walking up on stage. The applause is building. He's greeting both Lynch and Doria here. And let's go on stage now with Governor Tom Kean as he prepares to give his final State of the State message. Well, before he gives his final State of the State message, there's the pause for the photographers on stage. You'll be seeing this picture on most of the newspapers in New Jersey and New York and Philadelphia tomorrow.
Be seated, please. It is now my distinct honor to introduce a man who will not soon fade from our memory. Over the last 8 years, he has brought notoriety to our state and a new spirit to our people. He has left an indelible mark on the history of New Jersey with bold and pace-setting initiatives to improve education, clean up our environment, and revitalize our economy. All New Jerseyans, Republicans and Democrats alike, can take justifiable pride not only in what he has done, but most especially in what he stands for. I give you the Governor of the State of New Jersey, the Honorable Thomas H. Kean.
The thought hit me at exactly 4:36 last Friday afternoon. I was getting ready, as I had so many thousands of times over the past 8 years, to change for the evening's event. In this case, it was a black tie performance at the McCarter Theater in Princeton. I was trying to fit my dress shoe on my right foot when I stopped. And I looked up, and I sat back in my bed, and I suddenly realized, in less than 2 weeks, I won't be governor anymore. No more 16-hour days, no more phone calls at 1 in the morning, no more state troopers by my side every minute and every hour of the day. And as this realization finally sunk in, I couldn't get my mind off the profound words of one very special American, Not Lincoln, not Wilson, not Whitman or Roosevelt or Paine. No, I thought of the words of Sally Field. Now you remember Sally, the Flying Nun. Remember when she finally won an Academy Award and she stood up on national TV and said, "I can't believe you like me. You really like me." Well, well, as I sat in my bed last Friday and I thought about today's speech, I realized the simple truth that must pass through the mind of every public servant as they leave office. From this day onward, it doesn't matter if you like me. I stand before you today for the 8th time as governor, and yet this is the first time I come before you utterly unconcerned about the next poll, or tomorrow's front page, or how a legislator is going to respond to a particular program. This is a powerful new awakening. As I thought about it, I said to myself, this is it. This is the day to get it all off your chest. This is the day to really let loose, to say what's really on your mind, to forget all that gracious patrician stuff, and take no rhetorical prisoners. And then I thought, I can't do that. Do you really want to hear me speak for 15 straight hours? But seriously, I come before you today, a man who has realized that another chapter in his life is ending, but I have absolutely no regrets, no recriminations whatsoever. I stand before you with a mind crowded with wonderful memories of 8 great years, with a chest filled with pride for the tremendous progress that we've made together, and with a heavy heart, but just a little bit heavy, to leave the job of serving the greatest people in the greatest state, in the greatest nation on God's great earth. As I look back on my 8 years in office, I think of the events both small and large. I remember the pomp and circumstance surrounding presidential visits. In 1988, I remember President Reagan visited our state for one of the last times in office. And as usual, I met Air Force One at Newark Airport and climbed into the back seat of that limousine with the President and Chief of Staff Ken Duberstein, and led by long lines of police cars with lights flashing, we proceeded up the Parkway to Parsippany. And we were passing the cemetery on the Parkway in East Orange when the President looked at me and asked, "Tom, how many dead people do you think are buried in that cemetery?" And I, of course, said, "I have no idea." And President Reagan said, "They're all dead people. That's the only kind they put in cemeteries." And I remember marveling once again at the easy way that man shouldered the heavy mantle of world leadership. And I also remember thinking that joke was probably as old as the President himself. Those big events were fun. But I also remember the little things. I remember a letter I received 5 years ago from the Pellico family in Verona, complaining about the inflexible people at the Department of Environmental Protection. Now, I admit,
Letters complaining about the DEP are not that unusual. But this one wasn't about ECRA or CAFRA or Pineland's building permit. This one was about a raccoon. Cooney the raccoon, to be exact. You see, he had been named after Jerry Cooney, the almost famous boxer. Anyway, the ever-vigilant folks at the DEP had discovered Jerry. And they told his family that they had to get rid of him because, you see, they didn't have a permit to keep a raccoon as a pet. Well, now, those folks at DEP were just doing their job. But they didn't know one thing. They didn't know what that pet meant to that family, and they didn't know that my family had had a pet raccoon when I was young. So I made a few phone calls. And guess what? The Palicos got their permit. And then just this Christmas, I received a card in the mail. And I can tell you with complete authority that while Jerry Cooney, the boxer, is struggling to get in shape for his match with George Foreman, Jerry Cooney, the raccoon, will still go a good 12 rounds with any cat that dares to cross his driveway. And as I look back, I remember faces, tens of thousands of New Jersey faces, filled with pride one hot July day in 1986 as we all celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty in New Jersey at Liberty State Park. And I recall other faces, 3 years before that, faces filled with fear and uncertainty in the iron-bound section of Newark as I went door to door reassuring people who had been frightened by the discovery of the chemical dioxin in their neighborhood. And I remember their quiet dignity as they said, "Thank you, Governor. We feel better now." And I remember all the sights, and I remember the sounds and smells as well. I heard Southside Johnny blaring from boomboxes on the boardwalk at Seaside Heights. And I listened to the soaring sounds of a Mozart sonata wafted across the woods at Waterloo Village in Stanhope. And I enjoyed the quiet rush of a river in the Pinelands and endured the clamor of cars backed up on the streets of Jersey City at rush hour. And I ate pierogies and pizza and bagels and burritos and gyros and goulash and hundreds of other foods that even more difficult for me to pronounce, but too good for me to ever forget. As my tongue tasted irresistible evidence of the patchwork quilt that is our state of New Jersey. I did this day after day, week after week, year after year. Most evenings I came home after 10 o'clock, a list of problems in my head and a list of phone calls to return in my hand. And usually I slumped in bed, exhausted, maybe by 1 or 2 in the morning. But you know, no matter how tired, I could never wait for the morning to come, because every day was filled with some incident that reinvigorated my faith in human nature and the fundamental decency, humor, and understanding of the people we are so privileged to serve. Every day, I gathered another piece of evidence that Churchill was so right when he said that democracy is the very worst form of government ever invented, except for all the rest. Thank yous? I have a few. About 7.5 million to be exact. But I just want to single out a couple of people. First, to you, the men and women of our state legislature. At times we've disagreed, I admit that. But more often than not, we've worked together. I can say now that we've never let politics stand in the way of progress. We've shared the weariness of late-night budget negotiations, the euphoria of seeing a simple idea suddenly become law, and the frustration of watching new problems rise to take the place of old ones. But through it all, I still feel the same as I did 22 years ago, on the day I took my oath and walked down the aisle to take my seat among you as a proud member of the State Assembly. when it gets right down to it, the members of our legislature care about only one special interest, and that's the welfare of all the people of our state of New Jersey. And I also want to thank the more than 80,000 people who have made both of us look good these last 8 years. I'm talking now about our state employees. We live in an age when it's fashionable to belittle so-called bureaucrats. To me, this fashion should be put in a closet alongside our tattered leisure suits and Nehru jackets. I've watched state troopers risk their lives so that young people can grow up free from drugs. And hospital workers hug lonely babies born with the burden of AIDS. I've heard of college professors who work past midnight trying to figure out a way to unlock the mysteries of Dryden's poetry for a shy or reluctant student. I saw DOT workers give up their summer vacation to reopen I-78 and end a nightmare for thousands of commuters. It's been said that serving humanity is the highest creed. Well, by that definition, New Jersey is lucky to be served by 80,000 ministers, priests, and rabbis who all work for state government. I'd also like to thank our other public servants. You won't find their names in any state phone book. They don't get any state paycheck every week. No, they work in corporations. They work in labor unions. They teach in our schools. They minister in countless churches and community organizations. Like the chief executive officer of a proud New Jersey corporation, a very, very busy man. He was never too busy for his hometown that happened to be the city of Newark. His name was Bob Van Fossen. And another guy, an operating engineer by trade, who worked tirelessly to rebuild our roads and in the process give workers what he thought was the essential ingredient of dignity, the chance to do an honest day's work at a good wage. And his name was Jackie Pearson. And a third fella who spent every weekend and evening in steadfast pursuit of a dream to make Rutgers one of our nation's premier universities, and his name was Ed Blaustein. These three servants are with us no longer, but their spirit is alive and well. It's been said that being governor can be a lonely job, but for me, it never was. It never was lonely. Every time I reached outside government and asked for help, the answer was not just yes, but what else can we do for you? In just a few days, my successor will take office. Governor Florio will ask for your help, as I did many times before. And in the best tradition of New Jersey, I know you will provide that help. Today, I wish Governor Florio, his family, and his staff good luck and God's blessing as they face the challenges of the new decade. There's one more group of people I want to mention. As you know, I'm a private man, and I've always worked hard to keep my wife and children out of the limelight. But the pressures are always there. The long hours, the lost weekends, the nasty headline at the top of your morning newspaper, the noisy protest, sometimes at the bottom of your driveway. For me, and most public servants, it's just part of the job. But for our families, it's not so easy to accept. My family has borne the slings and arrows of public life with courage and with dignity. They've always been my staunchest cheerleaders, my most honest critics, and my very best friends. So today, I offer a special thanks to my 3 children,
and most especially to my wife, Debbie. January 19th, 1982, I first stood before you as governor. The dark clouds of recession hung over us. There was misery around family dinner tables as layoff notices arrived in the mail. In our schools, there was distress because children's performance was tumbling. In our communities, anger as air and water was polluted. And all around us, it seemed to me, a sense of malaise, a feeling that maybe problems were just too big for us to solve. January 1982. It seems so very long ago. Back then, perestroika was just a word, Ollie North just a kernel, a CD just a savings device, and Zaza just a lover, not a fighter. So much has changed in these 8 years, around the world and here at home. Today, there are no more layoff notices. They've been replaced by signs that are begging for new workers. We stand on the crest of the 84th consecutive month of economic growth. In just 8 years, we've created almost 800,000 new jobs for the people of New Jersey. In our schools, test scores are climbing again. We're cleaning our drinking water and protecting our parkland. And even our shore and our ocean has begun to revive. We did it together. We climbed from laggard to national leader. Looking for a state that recruited outside professionals to the classroom, we did it here, first. Looking for a state that stretched scarce dollars to invest in roads and clean water and open space, we did it here, first. Looking for a state that had the courage to say no one should be turned away from a hospital because he can't pay the bill, we did it here, first. And if you're looking for a state that said no to the evil of apartheid, and yes, to a chance for every child, even in the worst urban schools. Once again, we did it here, first in New Jersey. That's just a partial list of our accomplishments. Our tough drug laws, best in the nation. Our enterprise zones and welfare reforms to give skills and jobs to the needy, best in the nation. Campaign finance laws, our shore protection plan, higher education challenge, all considered the very best in the nation. You know, I said 10 minutes ago that it didn't matter if you liked me anymore. And now I'm listing all the accomplishments to impress you. I guess for us politicians, old habits really do die hard. But I'm proud. You see, I'm proud of what we accomplished together. I'm not saying we did everything. I admit parts of our agenda remain unfinished. But all match our record against any other. We made the radical reform seem almost commonplace. The unlikely coalition seem lightly. The bold and original idea seem almost an everyday occurrence. We treated the status quo with utter disdain and proved that government can anticipate problems, not merely react to them. The heady praise and the headlines of today flatter us, but the real impact of our work will be felt by generations to come, by today's teenagers who will work in the high-tech labs we built together, by today's first graders who will learn in schools filled with better teachers, higher standards, and stronger values that we provided together, by today's infants who will live to experience the sheer terror of that first day of kindergarten, the warm laughter of the wedding day, and the unbridled joy as they look in their grandchildren's eyes because of a compassionate healthcare system that we forged together. People ask me about our most lasting and important accomplishment. I tell them it's not something that can be compiled on a chart, plotted in a graph, or really even measured by a poll. We forged an identity. We reaffirmed
a sense of purpose, and we build a new pride in this place we call New Jersey. As a student at Princeton many years ago, I told other students I was from New Jersey, and they responded with wisecracks. The very first time when I was a legislator and I was asked to represent our state at an out-of-state conference, another elected official came up to me and said, "You're from New Jersey? Well, then you must want to serve on our crime committee." Now, those memories have always rankled me. But now I have other more recent memories, and those are memories that warm my heart. I remember literally tens of thousands of people from country fairs to urban ethnic festivals who have come up to me in the past 8 years and said, "You know, I'm darn proud to be from the state of New Jersey." Last year, I spent a few days visiting Hungary, visiting my son on his college semester abroad. It was one of those rare instances when I totally escaped from the governor's office. No staff along, just me and my son. And he did what most college students would do. He dragged me to a dark, damp, underground bar in downtown Budapest. And I was standing there, surrounded by people speaking a strange language, halfway around the world, when the crowd parted, and a guy from Scotch Plains walked right up to me and said, "Governor Kean?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm darn proud to be from New Jersey." And think about this. How many times you picked up the paper the last few years to read about the president of our nation talking about education or the environment or creating jobs in the economy? And how many times have you seen him say to the whole rest of America, when it comes to solving this problem, we should follow New Jersey? Now, some think that building pride is just a public relations strategy. All you do is cheer loudly for a few sports teams, have your governor make a few commercials saying a few words together perfectly. But pride is so much more than that. Pride imbues everything we do. It infects all our actions. Pride is the cousin of ambition, the brother of success, and the father of progress. Without pride, we can do nothing. But with pride, we can do it all. Most important, pride is not something we feel. Pride is something we do. And as I leave this office, I ask the people of New Jersey to remember the true meaning of pride. As you know, I'm bullish in our state. And for that matter, I'm bullish on America. But as I look around the globe on this January day, I do have one worry. We have witnessed more changes in the world in the 12 months past than most of us have seen in our entire lifetimes. As the Soviets experiment with voting machines and the Poles with free enterprise, our chests justifiably just swell up with pride and we say, "We won." And then we wonder, can people who have spent their lives in the false security of socialism handle the risks and responsibilities of free enterprise and freedom? I'm not worried about the people in Hungary and Poland and Panama because they are never turning back. I'm worried about closer to home, worried that we now take freedom for granted and believe prosperity to be our birthright, not something that must be earned and shared and passed onward. The great Greek historian Edith Hamilton once observed that when the freedom they wished for was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free and was never free again. I see signs, small, but still foreboding, that we may have forgotten that eloquent warning spoken by a young president now more than a quarter of a century ago.
Democracy consists of more than asking what we can get from our country, but also in seeing what we can give. In our state, we must build hospitals to care for babies with AIDS, prisons to hold the crooked and corrupt, and facilities to destroy the unwanted byproducts of our industrial age. And yet, when we start to build these necessities, we hear the same refrain over and over. No, not here. Don't build them here. Go somewhere else. And what of our schools? No challenge is more important. No problem has occupied more of our energy and attention. And I believe no state, frankly, has made as much progress. Still, I'm bothered by something. Our taxpayers now spend more money per child in school than any other taxpayers in the whole United States. And yet our state monies are distributed by a formula that is outdated and in many ways unjust. Now we're waiting. We're waiting for the courts to tell us what to do. That's wrong. Elected officials are always better suited than appointed ones. Why don't we make the decision? Why don't we revise that formula ourselves? And I'm bothered by something else. When I had the temerity to suggest eliminating mandatory gym classes, I was deluged with letters of complaints from students and from parents and from teachers. And yet, so much rarer were letters from parents saying, you know, I don't think my child's English program is good enough. What can I do to help? Now, I just ask you, what does that say about our priorities? And what of the environment? How much longer can we pile condo on top of condo, strip mall on top of strip mall, in some mad race to fatten the wallets of a few while destroying the natural treasures that can be enjoyed by so many? And one more thing. As we settle into our reclining chairs at night, surrounded by our VCRs and remote controls and CDs and Nintendo games, do we think of the children in our inner cities who are not worried about escaping the Pac-Man on the video screen, but the drug dealer who's right in the tenement on the corner? Yes, we've practiced the politics of inclusion together. And while I admit not all our approaches have worked, we've tried, and we've tried, and we've tried. But we must continue to reach out and embrace and include, because the simple truth is this: as I've said 1,000 times before, America as a whole doesn't make it in the next century if 20% of Americans are left behind. These are the challenges, and they're not unique to New Jersey. They confront all America. They really go beyond government. No government can mandate parental concern about schools. No government can dictate community sacrifice or make the suburbs care about the cities. Government can't do it alone, but pride can. If we are truly proud, as New Jerseyans and as Americans, we will not allow the sturdy foundation of democracy, painfully constructed for over 2 centuries, to be nibbled to pieces by the 3 termites of selfishness, indifference, and greed. Our forebears did not shed the blood of war or cry the tears of depression to see freedom and free enterprise rise in the East, only to wither in the West. We must be true to the past, because we owe it to the future. The very best part of being governor has been the opportunity to meet with so many children. As you know, I tried to visit a classroom once a month, and the best advice I can give my successor is to follow the same habit. Believe me, there's no better cure for the hot air and the hyperbole of Trenton than to sit down with a 10-year-old child. As my term in office has wound down, some children have written some thank you letters to me. I'd like to share them with you. One girl named Leandra wrote to tell me I was now her favorite governor. Because I was her favorite governor, she told me the name of the little boy in her class that she had a crush on. But you see, I can't tell you, because Leandra asked that I swear to keep it a secret. And a boy named Seth wrote to express his sympathy about my busy schedule. And then he wrote, "I heard you get a lot of money, so I don't blame you for working so hard." And then there was good old Rennie. Rennie, he wrote probably the most candid line I've heard the past 8 years. He said, "I'm very sorry you're leaving office, but that's life, bud." Well, Rennie, that is life, bud, and I accept it. But for you, life is going to be a lot of things. You're going to grow up in a world in which people will live in colonies on the moon, in which electricity may be only found in museums, and in which people in every corner of our globe will breathe the fresh air of freedom. Will New Jersey be on top of that world? Well, there are no guarantees. But I can tell you this, we're building the answer today. It's our job, here and now, to take the foundation laid down by generations before us and erect on it a new mansion of prosperity and responsibility, so that Rennie and Seth and Leandra can climb inside, and when they're ready, they will build their own addition. That's really what I've tried to do as governor. And though I'm now turning in my chief foreman's hard hat, I think I can still weld a pretty good hammer. I won't be far away from the construction site, cheering you on, prodding and cajoling, and who knows, someday I might even roll up my sleeves again and do a little more work myself. For now, all I can say is this: to Rennie, Seth, and Leandra, and 7.5 million New Jerseyans, thanks for the privilege of serving you. To everyone connected with state government, thanks for making this the best job that I ever had. And to everyone in the War Memorial, and to those watching on television, thanks for listening to me one last time. God bless you, and God bless New Jersey, and goodbye.
And so Governor Thomas Kean concludes his 8th and final State of the State message to the people of New Jersey. The governor spoke for approximately 40 minutes, and his address was punctuated around 20 times by applause. In his address, the governor said that he had no regrets and no recriminations about the 8 years he has served as the state's chief executive. He looked ahead and said there are problems facing New Jersey, such as school aids funding formula. He also said there's a problem of overgrown development, and he said the people of the state need to care more about kids in our urban areas. But most of all, it was a speech where the governor looked back fondly on his 8 years, and I personally think it was a speech that further reinforced the governor's image, that also reinforced New Jersey's image as being a nice place to live, because he gave himself here as being a nice guy. Let's go back to the studio now to Michael Aaron and Kent Manahan.
All right, Larry, thank you. Michael, there were a few good lines in that speech, to say the least. The reference to the patchwork quilt of New Jersey, and also the governor's request to serve on a crime commission because he was from New Jersey.
They were good lines. I thought it was vintage Tom Kean and somewhat moving at the end, particularly at the end, and he looked a little bit moved himself at the very end, although maybe not as much as I
Not
would.
as emotional as I thought he was. Almost relief in a lot of ways. Well, certainly some sadness, but really looked to me like it's over, thank God.
The lines were emotional when we read them, but maybe because you're performing and you're so concerned about the performance, you can't allow yourself to be real at that moment. And yet when he finally finished, it looked like there were some tears in his eyes. I thought it was vintage Tom Kean. It was classy.
Humor.
There was corny humor in there.
Nostalgia.
Nostalgia. We learned that he can't pronounce Zsa Zsa Gabor's name very well. Zaza, he called her. It was progressive. It touched all the bases. It included AIDS and the poor and the cities and the problems of runaway growth.
And perhaps just a suggestion of some things that should be carried on in another administration, reform of the T&E law.
Yeah, that was unusual. I mean, farewell addresses traditionally carry warnings in them, and he warned us against selfishness, indifference, and greed, but he did throw that one specific proposal out there that the school funding formula be revised. And it was interesting the way he did it. There is a Supreme Court case, as you know, Abbott versus Burke, that may call for a revision, and he urged the legislature to act before the Supreme Court acts sometime later this year. He sort of made a slap at the judiciary a little bit, took a slap at the judiciary. He said elected officials are always better suited than appointed officials to tackle these big problems. I read that as a slap at the judiciary, particularly since the printed version of the speech said legislators are always better than elected officials are always better than appointed officials. He added better suited when he delivered the line.
We talked about emotion from the governor. There was certainly some emotion in Mrs. Kean's face when he made the reference to his wife, Debbie, and thanked her.
There was. I don't think we have seen her emotional in cutaways like that before, but yes, that was a nice picture. We saw her laughing at one of his jokes a few moments later.
Just briefly, the last reference near the end of the speech to rolling up his sleeves and perhaps participating again, maybe a look ahead to the future that he might run again for office?
Definitely a tease line
yes.
for all of us who follow these things. Yes, he held the door open to future public service.
All right, Michael, thank you. And that wraps up our live coverage of Governor Thomas Kean's final State of the State address, a speech of humor, of nostalgia, and of some insight into the future. And now Tom Kean goes on to become president of Drew University. And as we say goodbye, a special thanks to Ellen Everett from the Katzenbach School for the Deaf for signing our program this afternoon. I'm Kent Manahan. Thank you for being with us.